Hello fellow StarCraft 2 players, welcome to another Gosubuilds guide. This time we're going to be looking at the TVP 1-Rax FE into double upgrades build. This one is a variation of the standard 1-Rax FE into Medivacs, except for this build it's a lot greedier, so it's definitely a lot less safe in the early game, but it's a lot greedier in that you get your upgrades earlier and you get your Medivacs on time, so you end up cutting a lot of army in order to kickstart your mid-game and then even late game, and hopefully crush your opponent with a 2-2 timing or a 3-3 timing or a ghost and 2-2 timing, something later in the game. It's not designed around doing damage with the 10-minute push. It's much, much more designed around taking the mid-game and fast-forwarding it directly into the late game. So in this build, just like almost all of them, you start with the 10 depot, and then you start with the 12 barracks. And because it is a 1-Rax FE, you'll see at 13 supply, we do not take gas. We end up going straight for a command center after this 1 barracks. And just to reiterate that point that I just made, this build is not designed around the 10-minute attack. You use the 10-minute attack with this build to take map control, but really, your army is not very strong, not very large, pretty insignificant on the whole. However, your upgrades are ridiculously far ahead of your opponents, so if you can time an attack around 2-2 much later in the game, you'll be a much, much stronger army, and you'll have a great economy behind it, so you can afford a good timing attack. Not at the 10-minute mark, however. Alright, and with this build we see that we get 1 Marine, then start the orbital, and then this SCV, when he gets down to the natural, he'll have around 400 mins before your second Marine, before your second depot, to throw down the command center on the low ground. You can throw this command center on the high ground, however, this wasted time really adds up on a build that's very, very tight and you really can't be late in order for this build to time out, so putting it on the low ground is pretty important actually with this build. And definitely scouting at 10 supply is a big no-no because you just won't have the minerals in order to do this sort of a thing. So try not to scout too early in order to waste minerals, and try to focus on just making sure this build is performed solidly. Once you've started that depot, you can resume the barracks, and with this build we start with only 2 racks entering the mid-game. So normal builds, you'll get a 1-Rax FE into 2 more racks into double gas. This one, however, skips the 3rd racks and goes directly into the 2 gas. And you'll see exactly why this is later on. It's very closely related to Thorzane's TVP build, however this one is much, much greedier than Thorzane's, and for that matter is also a lot less safe, but we'll see that in a second. Over here, as soon as you can afford it after those 2 gas geysers, you want to throw down the bunker. If your opponent is chrono boosting a zealot at you, then it might be a good idea to actually abandon this build and just go for something a lot more standard, because really this build is very flimsy in the early game, and it's much more designed around the late game. As soon as this barracks finishes, you'll see you'll have around 75 gas, and that's when you can throw down the reactor, and then immediately afterwards the tech lab onto this barracks. Right there. And still 3 guys in each gas geyser, still making constant SCVs, and as soon as this finishes, Marines.
Upgrade complete. And
the important thing about this is that these 2 add-ons mean you're not producing anything right now. There's been no army produced for 35-40 seconds. So if your opponent is doing a 4-gate, you actually will probably lose, funny enough. However, most people don't do that anymore, and if you do see a 4-gate coming, you can just choose not to build these add-ons and actually make an army. Once these add-ons are done, they should finish around the same sort of time. You'll have 100 gas, you can start stim, and then immediately afterwards, you throw down these 2 NG bays. This is the focus of the build, these 2 NG bays this early. You notice that they're started around 6 minutes, which is incredibly early. Normally only 1 is, and then the other one's added much later, and then you sort of start 2-1 or maybe 2-2 much later in the game. This one goes directly into 1-1, directly into 2-2, and kickstarts upgrades for the mid-game a lot earlier. Once they're finished, I like to time them to be exactly the same. You start +1 infantry and +1 armor, and then immediately get your factory. And you'll see that you have 100 gas each. And, you'll have 100 gas after you finish these. Each of these costs 100 gas. And you'll have +1, and the factory. Keep making SCVs, keep making Marines. No, not Marauders coming out of this tech lab. You can't afford that gas. And again, like I said, this build cuts a lot of corners. So we see that our army is pretty insignificant. Any sort of all-in would probably kill us. So if you know your opponent, if you feel your opponent is being aggressive, or you know they're being aggressive, then this is not the go-to build that you should look at. Maybe look at Thorsanes, maybe look at a variation. And then once you have the minerals, get these 2 gas geysers right here. They'll finish around the same time your factory will. And once your factory is done, just like always, get the reactor on the factory and the starport nearby to swap off. And then as soon as that's started, pretty soon after, you'll have 100 gas, you'll have 150 mins, and you can throw down an armory right here. And once that armory is done, hopefully 1-1 will be very close to done, so it'll all time out. 3 in each gas geyser, obviously, as soon as you can. And notice how we're still only making Marines. Just about right now is when you can finally start to afford Marauders, but instead I like to get combat shields because I feel like the strength of this is definitely not your army, so there's no reason to even try to go for it just yet. Just go straight for the Marines, get the combat shields instantly, and get the medevacs instantly. Notice how still building SCVs, hopefully, that is a problem. Not building SCVs is definitely a big problem. 2 medevacs as soon as you can afford it, and you can scout with this factory. But remember, we're not going for a timing attack, we're going for a map control push. Armory finishes, you see it's about in time with 1-1, and we should have about enough minerals and gas to start 2-2 right away. There's +2, and there's +2 armor. So right away we get these, and 2-2 is started at 9:35-ish, which is incredibly early. But again, notice how small and insignificant your army is. This doesn't have a single marauder. There are no marauders on the map right now, and we're pushing out. And the strength of this build is not this timing attack, so if you can, avoid committing to a fight, because you're not going to win fights. What you will win, however, is the upgrade battle, and upgrades in TVP are ginormous. So going towards the late game, you'll just have such a huge leg up on upgrades that hopefully you can just crush in a later fight with some solid micro, but definitely not in this fight right here. And then now you get to push out, 2-2's on the way, combat shields will finish before any remotely close to engage happens. And if you see your opponent being ridiculously greedy, then obviously you can commit because you have stim, you have combat shields, you have medevacs, and you have 1-1, but you just don't have enough units that you really need to play it safe with your army. So again, let me go over this build really quickly. It's a 1-Rax FE. You get the 10 barracks, you get the 10 depot, 12 barracks, then get your command center on the low ground immediately after this orbital command, before the second depot. Then you get the second depot, then you get 1 more barracks, double gas, and then bunker. And this bunker is really like a super safety measure. Again, it's very flimsy build. It's not designed around the early game, and so if you feel your opponent's being aggressive, you should not go for this build. It's just not a safe build to do. But it's a very, very, very macro-oriented build that hits in the mid and late game. So you get the 2 gas, the bunker, and on these 2 barracks, finally, you can start a reactor, you can start a tech lab. When they finish around the same time, you'll get stim. Then you'll get the 2 NG bays. When the NG bays are finished, you should have around 300 gas, so you can start +1 attack, +1 armor, and a factory. And then once the factory is done, or actually just before the factory is done, you want to have these 2 gas geysers go down so that they finish when the factory is done. And then you can build the starport right next to the factory, the reactor on the factory, do the swap off that we did, and then go for 2 medevacs and 2-2 around the same time. Now again, just to reiterate, this build is a macro build, a super macro build. It is not designed around the 10-minute attack. This army is very small. You only want to be taking map control. You want to be killing stalkers, making the opponent feel worried, maybe force an extra unit or 2 or an extra warp in that they don't want to make, instead of getting charge and storm instantly, or Colossus if they started with storm, something like that. But your strength is going to be 2-2 and 3-3 being early. So for that matter, your transition, regardless of what you're doing, when 2-2 finishes, you need to be at exactly 500 so that you can start 3-3. The strength is the upgrades. That's why this build is so strong. And usually people get a fast third command center behind it, behind this small push out in order to, again, maintain map control. And with the fast third, you focus on the macro, you focus on your strength, which is the 2-2, the fast 2-2, the fast 3-3, the fast upgrades. So getting a fast third kind of goes along with that so that you're in a good place going into the late game. And that right there is the 1-Rax FE into double medevacs build in TVP. So thanks for watching.